It's Tuesday, January 28th, 2025. Trump says no more trannies in the military. Don't fall for the emotional blackmail on immigration, and why the refs rigging games for the Kansas City Chiefs is a figment of your imagination. Next on the AM Update.
I want to go back to those military flights going south. As you said, we have never seen that before. Is that going to be a constant commitment from the U.S. military every single day to take deportees out?
Yes.
How many people are getting attacked?
And I think that the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops needs to actually look in the mirror a little bit and recognize that when they receive over $100 million to help resettle illegal immigrants, are they worried about humanitarian concerns, or are they actually worried about their bottom line?
Last night at House Republicans' annual retreat in Florida, Donald Trump addressed Republicans and says it's time to get rid of the income tax.
It's time for the United States to return to the system that made us richer and more powerful than ever before. Do you know, the United States in 1870 to 1913, all tariffs, and that was the richest period in the history of the United States, relatively speaking. In other words, relatively. And they set up the Great Tariff Commission of 1887, and this commission had one function: what to do with all the money that we took in. It was so enormous that they had no idea. It was a blue ribbon committee. It was set up 1887, and what to do with all of the money that we had. And again, Teddy Roosevelt was a beneficiary, because when McKinley was killed, he took over this vast sum of money, and he did all of those national parks and all of the other things. And I'm not knocking him, but he was given a vast amount of money, and that was all made through tariffs. We had no income tax. The income tax came in 1913. As I said in my speech last week, instead of taxing our citizens to enrich foreign nations, we should be tariffing and taxing foreign nations to enrich our citizens. Does that make sense, right?
President Donald Trump signed a new executive order restricting so-called transgender troops from serving in the military. The new order requires Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth to update medical standards to ensure they, quote, prioritize readiness and lethality, and take action to, quote, end the use of invented and identification-based pronouns within the Department of Defense. The order also restricts sleeping, changing, and bathing facilities by biological sex. It's not an immediate ban, but a direction for the Secretary of Defense to implement such policies. It revokes former President Joe Biden's executive order. The White House argues, quote, allowed for special circumstances to accommodate gender identity in the military to the detriment of military readiness and unit cohesion. The order builds on another directive Trump issued last week that revoked a Biden-era order allowing so-called transgenders to serve in the military. On the campaign trail, Trump promised to reinstate the ban on trainee troops he imposed during his first term with little effect. In his inauguration speech, he said he would formally recognize that there are only two genders, male and female, which he has already done via executive order. The Justice Department has fired more than a dozen officials involved in former Special Counsel Jack Smith's prosecution of President Trump. Acting Attorney General James McHenry ordered the terminations because he believed the officials could not be trusted in, quote, faithfully implementing the president's agenda. That's according to a DOJ official speaking to Fox News anonymously. The statement read, quote, today, Acting Attorney General James McHenry terminated the employment of a number of DOJ officials who played a significant role in prosecuting President Trump. In light of their actions, the acting attorney general does not trust these officials to assist in faithfully implementing the president's agenda. The DOJ official argued the firings are in line with the Trump administration's mission of ending the weaponization of government. McHenry notified the DOJ officials who have not yet been identified of their firings earlier in a letter. It's unclear exactly how many officials received termination letters from McHenry. Yesterday in Virginia, Vice President J.D. Vance toured areas still recovering and rebuilding from the aftermath of Hurricane Helene and says the federal government can do a lot better job than FEMA.
Unfortunately, it's just a perfect example of the bureaucratic inadequacy of the last administration and why we need to do better in this country. You know, the thing that I heard most when I was in Western North Carolina before the inauguration, but it was after the election, is that there are people who wanted to put trailers or other temporary housing in particular areas of Western North Carolina, but they couldn't because FEMA had designated these particular areas to be ineligible for the type of assistance that would allow people to put that temporary housing in the first place. That's another example of the sort of thing that's broken about the federal response. And it's actually, you know, when you have such great governors like Glenn Youngkin, and you talk to people, and it's like the local government's working, the state government is working as hard as it can, the local communities and the nonprofits and the churches are working at breakneck speed, and yet you have the federal government out there, the biggest institution with the most money that's not doing its job. It just drives home how much better we can do.
U.S. stocks dropped sharply Monday, and chipmaker NVIDIA lost nearly $600 billion in market value after a surprise quote-unquote advancement from the Chinese artificial intelligence company DeepSeek threatened the aura of invincibility surrounding America's technology industry. DeepSeek, a one-year-old startup, revealed a stunning capability last week, allegedly. It presented a ChatGPT-like AI model called R1, which has all the familiar abilities operating at a fraction of the cost of OpenAI's, Google's, or Meta's popular AI models. The company said it had spent just $5.6 million on computing power for its base model, compared with the hundreds of millions or billions of dollars U.S. companies spend for their AI technologies. Now, my first reaction to this was immediate skepticism. A week ago, the U.S. announced a $500 billion in AI infrastructure investment. Then, less than a week later, China comes out of nowhere with AI tech that meets the same or similar benchmarks to our leading edge, or so we thought, AI technology for a fraction, allegedly, of the cost. And this just so happens to wipe out $500 billion or more of NVIDIA stock in losses on the broader stock market. Oh, and China didn't have this tech 2.5-3 months ago and just happened to unveil it precisely right after Trump assumed office. Just impeccable timing. But after doing a little bit more research on this, I found out giving DeepSeek, this Chinese company that allegedly forced NVIDIA to lose almost $500 billion or more than $500 billion in market cap the other day, giving them the maximum benefit of the doubt that a company owned by the Chinese Communist Party probably does not deserve. It's really not so much of a breakthrough in AI technology, so much as it is maximizing efficiency at the cost of precision. This new chat box allegedly has a 90% accuracy against its much more expensive competitors. So that's great for chat boxes like ChatGPT, but for medical diagnostics, fraud prevention, self-driving cars, those are advanced capabilities and uses for artificial intelligence. Getting a failure 1 out of every 10 times is not actually very good. So again, this just reads to me, I'm not totally sure, and I've got my mind open to this, but again, this just reads like a very cheap Chinese imitation of the real deal American technology. Nevertheless, a story to keep an eye on. President Trump will sign an executive order to reinstate service members booted from the military for declining to get the COVID-19 jabs. The executive order directs the Secretary of Defense to reinstate all members of the military and active and reserve who were discharged for refusing the COVID jab and who request to be reinstated. The service members who are reinstated will be restored to their prior rank and will be provided with back pay and benefits, according to the fact sheet. The fact sheet notes, quote, from 2021 to 2023, the Biden administration and former Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin discharged over 8,000 troops solely due to their COVID-19 vaccination status. After the vaccine mandate was repealed in 2023, only 43 of the more than 8,000 troops dismissed elected to return to service under the Biden administration. And Secretary Austin, during his inauguration speech, of course, Trump pledged to make that move. That is restitutional justice, and that is undoubtedly and unquestionably a good move. More from Border Czar Tom Homan. Here he is on ABC News this week talking about the repatriation flights from the United States to foreign countries transporting illegal aliens.
I want to go back to those military flights going south. As you said, we have never seen that before. Is that going to be a constant commitment from the U.S. military every single day to take deportees out?
Yes.
So is this what we will see every single day, ending in what the president has promised is millions and millions being deported?
Yes. But you can see the numbers steadily increase.
The estimates of perhaps those who have been convicted or arrested in the past, 700,000 to over 1 million. So after you do that, then you go after everybody who is there illegally.
If you're in the country illegally, you're on the table, because it's not okay to, violate laws of this country. You got to remember, every time you enter this country illegally, you violated a crime under Title 8, United States Code 1325. It's a crime. So if you're in the country illegally, you got a problem. And that's why I'm hoping those who are in the country illegally who have not been ordered removed by the federal judge, should leave.
Correct. There's no such thing as a criminal illegal alien. All illegal aliens are criminal. That's just, at the very best, criminal illegal alien. You've heard that term bandied about every now and then. At best, that is a misnomer because everybody who is in this country has entered this country illegally. Well, there were a few people trying to enter the country illegally yesterday around Fronton, Texas. According to Fox News' Bill Malugin, citing multiple law enforcement sources, yesterday afternoon, Border Patrol agents near Fronton, Texas, were fired upon from Mexico by suspected cartel gunmen as a group of illegals were being brought across the river. Malugin says Border Patrol opened fire and returned fire. Nobody was hit on either side, and the illegal aliens did not make it across the river into the United States. A very dangerous situation on the southern border. Nevertheless, though, you're going to hear when we come back some of the emotional blackmail that we're all going to be privy to and subjected to over the coming weeks, months, and years, courtesy of a one-time very popular actress and singer. That's coming up next.
Say that I'm so sorry. How many people are getting attacked? The children. I don't understand. I'm so sorry. I wish I could do something, but I can't. I don't know what to do. I'll try everything, I promise.
That is 32-year-old actress and singer Selena Gomez. I'm not really sure where her star is right now. I know she's not nearly as popular as she used to be. She posted that video and then deleted it after outcry from even some of her own fans for just the abject phoniness of that message, crying about Donald Trump's deportation program. Get used to that. There's going to be a lot of emotional blackmail and using empathy as a weapon against maybe some of your more sensitive sensibilities. Again, that's Selena Gomez crying on camera in a now deleted video. But she's not the only one trying to play on your emotions. Last week, the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops echoed some of the same sentiments you heard yesterday from Pope Francis, calling Donald Trump's deportation efforts a disgrace. Well, J.D. Vance, vice president, was asked about that on CBS's Face the Nation, and here's his reaction.
Let me just address this particular issue, Margaret, because as a practicing Catholic, I was actually heartbroken by that statement. And I think that the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops needs to actually look in the mirror a little bit and recognize that when they receive over $100 million to help resettle illegal immigrants, are they worried about humanitarian concerns, or are they actually worried about their bottom line? We're going to enforce immigration law. We're going to protect the American people. Yeah. Donald Trump promised to do that. And I believe the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, if they're worried about the humanitarian costs of immigration enforcement, let them talk about the children who have been sex trafficked because of the wide open border of Joe Biden.
You personally
let them talk about
them going
people
into
like Laken Riley
churches.
who were brutally murdered. I support us doing law enforcement against violent criminals, whether they're illegal immigrants or anybody else, in a way that keeps us safe.
And just to be clear, J.D. Vance is a practicing Catholic himself. Our border czar, Tom Homan, is a practicing Catholic. I've seen numerous bishops and other priests come out online on social media and totally smack Pope Francis and the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. Lest you think, though, that they're just making up this problem out of thin air, here is this, just posted within the last couple of weeks, from one branch of Catholic Charities involved with so-called placement for illegal aliens.
Hi, my name's Barb Graham, and I'm an attorney at Catholic Charities of the Archdiocese of Milwaukee in the Refugee and Immigration Services Program. This is a video about knowing your rights if Immigration and Customs Enforcement approaches you. All people living in the United States, including people who are undocumented, have certain rights under the United States Constitution. If immigration officers, what we sometimes call Immigration and Customs Enforcement or ICE, come to your workplace, they must have a valid search warrant or the consent of your employer to enter non-public areas. If you are undocumented and immigration officers come to your workplace, be aware of the following. First, do not panic and do not run away. If you are frightened and feel like you need to leave, you can calmly walk toward the exit. If you are stopped, you may ask if you are free to leave. If the officer says no, do not try to exit the building. If you are questioned, you may tell them you want to remain silent.
So we're a minute into this video.
You have the right to remain silent.
This is an attorney for Catholic Charities just out and out trying to educate illegal aliens on how to skirt immigration and customs enforcement. An attorney for Catholic Charities doing this just with absolutely no shame. A minute into this, and she said, you have certain constitutional rights, even if you're not a citizen of this country. You have certain constitutional rights that the United States government, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, they cannot violate these rights. And then she proceeds to not actually cite what any of those rights actually are because it's a bunch of bunk. Again, this is a major problem, and J.D. Vance is right. Catholic Relief Services is one of many major refugee non-governmental organizations that's funded to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars of your tax money a year. These non-governmental organizations exist to undermine American immigration law, like you just heard there. Your tax dollars are funding the subversion of your country. J.D. Vance is absolutely right. These people with places like Catholic Charities, they of course need to look in the mirror and realize they don't really care about the alien and sojourner. They care about those dollar bills. And now a reminder on a couple of fronts in a deep blue state and a deep red state that the battle is just beginning. We have an opening, but the battle is just beginning. We go to the state of Michigan, where last week in her State of the State speech, Governor Gretchen Whitmer defended baby killing, abortion, as being just a good matter of economics.
Protecting these freedoms is the right thing to do, and it's just good economics. States with extreme laws are losing talent and investment because you know what? Bigotry is bad for business.
So yes, keep killing the babies. Otherwise, Moloch isn't going to send the rain. That's exactly what she said there. She said that in no uncertain terms. If you're a bigot, you're bad for business. Well, now we go to the deep red state of Florida. A bill was filed in Special Session 2025B on Monday. That's a whole nother ball game in and of itself, naming Agricultural Commissioner Wilton Simpson as the state's chief immigration officer. HB 1B was introduced by Florida Republican Representative Lawrence McClure. An identical version of the bill was filed in the Senate by Florida Republican Senator Joe Gruters. The legislation is titled Tackling and Reforming Unlawful Migration Policy, or the Trump Act. So what's actually going on here? Florida Governor Ron DeSantis explains.
So we called a special session of the Florida legislature in part to focus on immigration enforcement and to assist the Trump administration in this historic effort to finally have enforcement of immigration laws and secure our country once and for all. The legislature did not want to do it. They said it was premature, but they did come in today and gavelled in on their session on immigration. We had a series of very, very strong proposals. While they included some of the things we said, most of the stuff that's really, really going to be meaningful was not in the proposal put forward by leaders of the Florida legislature, the Republican leaders. You have to have a requirement that state and local entities actively cooperate with immigration enforcement federally. Otherwise, none of this stuff is going to amount to much. They gutted the interior enforcement provisions that we had where we're all working in unison. It's not enough to just say we're not a sanctuary state, which we're not. It's not enough to just say we don't have sanctuary cities, which we don't. We need everybody on board. We got to work as a team. Otherwise, this stuff just isn't going to work. They also bizarrely strip immigration enforcement power from the governor and give it to the Commissioner of Agriculture. But agriculture has not exactly been known for immigration enforcement, so it's almost like the fox guarding the hen house. It was bizarre. I think it was more a sop to folks who want cheap labor. That is totally bad policy. That can't happen. They also bizarrely didn't include things we know needs to happen. It should be a crime for an illegal alien to register to vote. We've been trying to do this for years. Now's the time to do it. They did not include that in their proposal, which was very disappointing. And then we also need to crack down on illegal alien gangs. We had very strong provisions to do that. That was not in what the legislative leaders proposed. Now, they've named this bill the Trump Act, but that's a misnomer because President Trump's been very strong coming out of the gate on immigration enforcement. He wants to solve this problem once and for all. The bill they did is more window dressing. It is not going to solve the problem. We're not here for theatrics. We're not here to do messaging bills. The only thing we need to do is to do things that are going to actually solve the problems for Floridians once and for all. People of Florida have spoke loud and clear over many election cycles that they want to be strong on illegal immigration. We have so many great potentials to be working collaboratively with the federal government. I've been speaking with folks in the administration, but what the legislature do not only will not allow us to do it, it will actively inhibit some of the things we're already doing. So now's the time to be tough. No squishing out here. We got to get the job done.
So that is Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who convened a special session of the Florida legislature to beef up their already pretty strong immigration laws locally in the state of Florida. Instead of following through on that special session, House Speaker Daniel Perez actually gavelled into and then gavelled out of that special session and gavelled into a new one, ignoring some of the issues set forth by Governor Ron DeSantis, which echoes Donald Trump's immigration views as well. Here's what happened, courtesy of Will Chamberlain from the Article 3 Project. Here's what Daniel Perez of Florida wants. He's their House Speaker. Illegal immigration and supporting President Trump's border efforts aren't, quote, important enough for a special legislative session, but they are important enough to gavel into your own special session. So again, Daniel Perez said yesterday, in gaveling into and gaveling out of the first special legislative session, that the efforts put forth in that original special session by Florida Governor Ron DeSantis aren't important enough. But they are important to go into a special legislative session. And what do you want to do in this other special legislative session? You're trying to pass a bill to strip immigration enforcement authorities from Governor DeSantis, who has aggressively and successfully fought illegal immigration in Florida. The House Speaker of Florida wants to give sole immigration enforcement authority to the Agricultural Commissioner, whose stakeholders have historically, of course, the Ag Commissioner, been the largest employers of illegal aliens in Florida. And you aren't now wanting to require state and local officials to cooperate with the Trump administration on deportation, as DeSantis' original proposal did. That is real. That's happening in a deep red state like Florida. So I wanted to pair these last two stories together. The absolute drumbeat for baby killing and all of the worst things in society right now continues on steadily, drum, beat, beat, in a place like Michigan. And in a place like Florida, which has become beet red, thanks to Governor Ron DeSantis. With friends like these, who needs enemies? In the midst of maybe the biggest tailwinds in favor of national sovereignty and immigration enforcement this country has seen in modern times, people in a place, legislators in a place like Florida, are still not only trying to strip Governor DeSantis of his power, they're trying to undo some of the things they've already accomplished legislatively on the issue of immigration in Florida. Again, the battle is just beginning. There is nothing that has been won permanently. And again, these two stories illustrate that fact perfectly. Coming up, we now know, thanks to the CIA, that the lab leak hypothesis was probably true. Later on this week, RFK Jr. is set to hold his confirmation hearing. It's time for him to take a victory lap. I told you about this yesterday. The CIA now says its preferred narrative on what happened, what the origin of the coronavirus pandemic is a lab leak from the Wuhan lab. Here is RFK Jr. He is Trump's nominee for Health and Human Services Secretary, who faces his nomination hearing later this week in the Senate. Here he is just a couple of years ago talking about the possibility that COVID escaped from a lab. He was called a kook.
They talk about this event called Event 201, which was a pandemic simulation that took place in October 2019 in New York. And it was sponsored by Bill Gates, I think the World Economic Forum, by the Chinese CDC. George Gao was there. Mm-hmm. The social media companies were there. The pharmaceutical companies were there. The big corporate PR firms were there. And they were...
The current DNI was there.
Yeah, the current DNI, Avril Haines, who's the director of national intelligence, who's the top spy now in the world. And at that time, she was the former deputy director of the CIA. And Avril Haines made her bones at the CIA by covering up the Abu Ghraib and the Guantanamo Bay torture tapes. She's President Biden's top spy. She was the former deputy director of the CIA, and she is at this simulation. What is the CIA doing in a pandemic simulation? They're not a public health agency. As I said, they're an agency that does coups d'etats. And if you look at what they did, that agency is simulating a global coronavirus pandemic that kills 60 million people, which is a lot more than the actual one did, which was 2 months later, which we learned about 2 months later. Although it was already circulating in October of 2019, we didn't know about it until January 2020. They're not talking about public health. They're not talking about how do we get vitamin D to everybody to build their immune systems, how do we keep them outside and healthy, how do we get people to lose weight, how do we quarantine the sick and yet, protect constitutional rights and protect the vulnerable and all of those kind of things that you would normally talk about. No. What they're talking about is using this pandemic as a pretext for clamping down totalitarian controls. And the first thing they said is we gotta limit free speech. We can't allow people to criticize government policies. And particularly, we cannot allow people to talk about a lab leak.
So that is RFK Jr., Trump's nominee for Health and Human Services Secretary, 2 years ago, saying what we knew at the time probably, that this was all kind of part of the plan, maybe. Event 201, you probably heard about that. Game planning for what a coincidence. Exactly what we saw a few months after Event 201. I think it's time for an RFK Jr. victory lap, which you just heard there. He called it was true then, and it's true now. And finally, air analysis, probably one of my most controversial air analyses, how do you say it, of all time. I'm coming to you with this simple truth. If you think the Chiefs have an unfair advantage, thanks to the refs, it's a figment of your imagination. Yes, my Kansas City Chiefs are going back to the Super Bowl for the third consecutive year. They have a chance to do what has never been done in the Super Bowl era, which is win 3 consecutive Super Bowl championships, world championships. That is, in and of itself, a win. And we're just playing with house money now as far as I'm concerned as a Chiefs fan. But here's the deal. Over the past many weeks now, there's been a narrative floating around both the NFL media, more so on that later in the season, and from the rank and file fans. And this narrative is that the league is rigged in favor of the Kansas City Chiefs, thanks to the refs, who give the Chiefs all the calls and all the crucial situations. And I'm here to tell you that is a figment of your imagination, if you really believe that. Here's a fact. No team has been penalized in late game situations in one-score games more than whom? The Kansas City Chiefs. Here's another fact. The Chiefs aren't even in the top 10 in terms of penalties that changed the probability of wins, meaning called for a penalty against the other team that greatly increases your chance of winning. They're not even in the top 10 of that. And then there's this. Since the start of the 2019 postseason, the Chiefs have had 11 playoff drives in fourth quarter or overtime when down by a score. Here's what they did in those 11 drives. 7 touchdowns and 4 game-tying field goals. 0 first downs by penalty on those 11 drives going back to the 2019 postseason. Here's what's really happening. The Chiefs don't have a Deflategate or Spygate. So people have to rely on figments of their imagination, like the refs are rigging the league in favor of the Chiefs. They have to rely on a figment of their imagination to justify their hatred of greatness. And make no mistake, what you are witnessing with my Kansas City Chiefs is greatness. That'll do it for Tuesday. Back at it again tomorrow. Keep an eye out for the poll of the week. That'll be at Real AM Update on X. Look for the pinned post. More again tomorrow. I'm Aaron McIntyre, and this is the AM Update.